you stuck, frozen in your legacy system, in your old mindset? Do you tell yourself back in the good old days, everything was better? And if so, is that really true? Today is about how we can get to a broader perspective. So, not only just looking at ourselves, but also about viewing how we think so we can get unstuck from those frozen mindsets, those legacy systems. And I'm going to start with a true story. So, this week we've had a lot of snow. It started when on January 1st I actually went to Amsterdam. To my surprise, there was snow on the road. At first I was like, what's that white stuff on the road? And why is the tunnel I entered before that, why is it wet? Because nothing was visible when I left The Hague. But then when I was close to Amsterdam, there were accidents, there was a traffic jam. So actually there was a collision of multiple cars. And well, it took me a little while longer to get there. But, I was in Amsterdam, I made it there, and everything was, well, let's put it this way, I had a great time with the one I met up with. Now, the following days, I didn't drive. So it's not like I cannot drive in snow, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to drive in Amsterdam. And also going back from Amsterdam to The Hague, there was snow again. And well, when I first started working, I had to get my driver's license. So I still remember the first time that it was like, oh, it's snowing and it's slippery on the roads and I need to drive back and I'm not sure if I'm going to like that. Anyway, someone said to me, someone who picked me up a few days later, like, people don't know how to drive in snow because we are not used to snow. And that's true. Now, having driven a lot of miles, I do know how to drive in snow. That doesn't mean that I prefer driving in snow, but I do know what to do. So she came and picked me up, another friend. She was in this area anyway. So I said, well, if you want to go to the beach, fine by me, but do me a favor, pick me up. So she did. And I had to laugh wholeheartedly when she wanted to go to the beach. And actually, she didn't go past the dunes. So I was like, okay, let's go down the slope and actually see the sea, the ocean. But no, that was too cold. So we found this restaurant where we had a great view of the ocean. And later on, when it got dark, we had a great view of the snow falling on the tables of the terrace. Days later again, it was still snowing, it was still cold. And at some point I was walking outside of the building and I was like, well, this is like a skating ramp. Well, not the ramp, but the track where you can actually skate, ice skate. So I was like, I'm not sure if I want to drive here. The next day I was done being stuck. I was like, okay, I need to get moving again. So when I stayed at home, I actually did so because they had called a code orange. So they said, don't go outside unless you really have to. Now, yesterday I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go for a walk. Not sure if that was yesterday or the day before yesterday. Those days, they sort of like become one. And I was like, well, the reason I actually went outside was because there was more snow. and it was like, okay, I can handle this. And there was actually a lot of slush also. It was starting to melt because the temperature was above freezing. So I was like, okay, let's go there. So for me, that's always a challenge because, well, my mobility and my stability are not that good. So there was one moment that I almost slipped away with my feet, and well, that was it. And I have to be very, very careful when that happens because, um, you know, being very mobile, my joints like to go in every direction, and it's not always very helpful for me. Anyway, I've walked more than I've done in a long time, especially with snow, because we don't have snow that often. But I have to say that I'm kind of proud of myself for doing so. Now, of course, I hear all the voices. Don't go on the road. It's dangerous. You don't know how to drive. Well, I'm not sure if they said so, but actually I do know. So that's a difference. But on the other hand, my car is a little bit older. So no, I don't want to get into an accident because who's going to pay for the damage? And I was like, well, I am insured for damage towards others, but when it comes to my own car, like I said, it's close to an old timer. So here we go. So I was like, okay, let's walk. And today I actually went out there on my bike again. I'd seen that most of the roads were clean, so I was like, okay, I'm good to go. So yeah, it was kind of nice to actually be out there on my bike again. Now, if we look at what happened in this week, a lot of flights, they were canceled. So there are a lot of planes who stop here, as in people have to transfer to other flights. Those people were stuck at the airport. Some of them went to hotels. Others were sleeping on camping beds or in the chairs at the airport. As it turns out, the planes need to be defrosted. So whenever there's a layer of ice on the wings, it's hazardous. So apparently the plane cannot get up. So they have to defrost it and then, of course, prevent it from getting ice again on there. But there are only 8 places, 8 spots where they can get defrosted, which has to do with the location of where they actually can get defrosted. And well, it took half an hour, and there are like hundreds of planes like actually lifting up from the airport. So that didn't work really well. Now, for other people who were advised to leave the airport, the most common thing to do is to take the train. Hang on. Trains didn't run either because, well, there are these where when you have the tracks and they go in a different direction, those switches, they were frozen solid. And someone asked this question: how is it possible that in this day and age, other countries are equipped when it comes to snow and we are not? Well, let's start with the most obvious thing. They charge more per person, so per passenger who is using public transportation. The other thing is we are not used to snow. And honestly, the last time there was like a 2-decade gap, let's put it that way, between when I saw it last snowing and then again. So 1991 was perhaps the last year. I remember taking pictures of snow. And then somewhere around 2011, that was the first time we got snow again. And having a full week of snow, that's unheard of, honestly. So we know that we can have snow in this country. Usually it's, like I said, it's a day, maybe a couple of days. And whenever it gets colder, we know that trains no longer run. I haven't heard that often that it's really a problem for the airplanes until this year. But, well, it won't be the first time that they had to defrost airplanes. I'm quite certain of that. But when it came to the whole infrastructure, like grocery deliveries, well, that was a problem too. So we nowadays have these services that are running like really cheap. And in order to do so, they have really cheap trucks. So basically, it's like the floor of a truck. Then there are a lot of crates packed on top of one another. And then there's only this screen on the outside, and it goes really high up. And I don't know if you know those small vans. And then when you go through the curve, through the curve, no, the curve, around the bend, then it's like they're going like this. And you're like, oh, this is not the way it's supposed to go. And then they slowly correct again. Now, the Netherlands, for the most part, is quite flat. But there are parts in the Netherlands where we actually have hills. So whereas in the cities, actually, those trucks couldn't go from one place to another because it was too slippery on the road. They had like these thin tires, because nowadays we need to do everything not only as efficient as possible, but also as cheap as possible, because we as consumers don't want to pay more than we have to. Well, even if we did want to pay more than we have to, still everything is getting smaller for the same price. It's not the same as, yes, back in the good old days, the one which I started out with. But when it came to people driving to the north of the country, for instance, there were actually hills, as in exits going uphill, and, well, trucks just, they flipped over. So, and even the cars who were supposed to make sure that the roads were de-iced actually got stuck too. But here's the thing. At some point, they brought in the big beast, the monster, the salt monster, called the lava storm. And the lava storm is a one-of-a-kind, unique monster, the salt monster, which is made especially for the Netherlands. And this one actually not only helps to distribute the salt on the roads, but it's also there to de-ice the roads by removing ice plates from the road. Well, when you see the whole thing, it's a beauty. But it only gets out when the roads are really bad. So it's a huge thing. There's like 50,000 liters of water, I think, that go in there. And it can literally de-ice the entire road. So kudos to, we call them Rijkswaterstaat, but apparently they're the Department of Public Services, but they are in charge of the roads and the waterworks, and probably making sure that the residents stay safe so we don't get drowned in water, or that our houses get lost in water. Now, what does this have to do with stuck mindsets, you might think, and legacy mindsets? Well, I don't know if you remember, but last week I told you a little something about the system scan. And today I talk to other people about that very same system scan. Why? Because they wanted to know what I was working on. And basically, what I'm working on is how certain things, certain ways of reasoning are no longer from this day and age. Well, actually, in reality, they are still used. But when it comes to practicality, does it serve them? Does it serve others? Not really. But in order to change that, it requires you to look at yourself and the way that you're thinking. So hence why I started with the whole snow story. Because if we look at the Netherlands, well, first of all, back in the days when it did snow a lot, they would use more material and sturdier material. And a lot of the problems that we have seen in the last decades, especially the one when it started snowing again, it didn't show up. But nowadays, of course, that's different. And like someone said, if you're not used to driving in the snow, well, that's how we get accidents, because people hit their brakes. We're not about tapping their brakes now, hitting their brakes. And what happens? Of course, you're going to slide. And then if the other one is still full speed behind you, not slowing down, well, then we have an even bigger problem. And it was visible, like in those first few meters. I was like, okay, the moment that I got into the traffic jam and I saw the accident, I was like, oh, this is actually where it started to hail, to snow. So I was a little surprised that people, well, probably hit the brake. I don't know. And others didn't. So then we get back to what do you know and how up to date are you with your information? So when we look at companies, for instance, the companies often deal with managers who have become a manager because of their skills, not their people skills, but when it comes to what they have to work with. So the topics, the expertise where they are good at. And back in the days, yes, back in the good old days, I'm not sure. But back in the days when I started working, so I've been in IT for like 2 decades. One of the reasons that I stopped working for a boss was I would be working, I would be invited for a talk. I got to work with a manager who said, go figure it out yourself. You have all the freedom. If you can handle it, awesome. And as long as you do what you need to do, then you go do it. So it gave me the opportunity to go whenever I wanted to, wherever I wanted, and work from whichever place I wanted, whether that was from home or one of the locations where the business would be. That was, of course, amazing. I'm one of those people who had to do a lot with customers. So I would be driving a lot of times to see what was going on. And yes, when I just talked about the lava monster, it wasn't there, or the lava storm, it wasn't there yet. But I did work for that same company, and I loved going to the traffic centers and seeing what was going on. It was a shame that things didn't work out the way they were. And a lot had to do with too much work and not being able to do it the way that I wanted to, even though for the people on higher levels, it actually did work out. So when I was still working in IT, I was like, one day, I'm going to make a change. One day, I'm going to make sure that we know about managers who don't have people skills, that something needs to change. When COVID hit, we were finally allowed, obligated to stay home. And to my surprise, when COVID sort of was over and done with, I mean, it's still around. Things seem to go back to, well, you have to be in, especially on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I was like, haven't we learned anything? So now we had 2 days of traffic jams. And the other result was that early in the afternoon, people would be driving back. So we would have traffic jams like most of the days, but especially earlier in the day. And the other thing was that a lot of people didn't know how to drive anymore. I was surprised with what they did. And especially, no one seemed to take the other person into consideration anymore. And basically, that's the whole thing that I'm talking about. So are we driving like this? Are we working and acting like this when you are a manager or a business owner? Do you do it like this? Because, well, when you're running a company, and especially if you have a team, you want to be able to work with that team and you want them to understand you. And whereas I had this view from the employee, like, hey, understand me, see me, don't try to control me by saying you need to be in at this and this time, or you need to stay here because you are the only one, even though I didn't do anything for that team. How functional is it? Does it really help you? And the other thing, of course, that I got to learn about was that complaint of the younger generation. Now, before I go there, that same younger generation, I've been guiding them, especially the millennials, for a while now. I've seen how they can run into not being understood, not knowing what to do, literally doing what's been asked, which also includes not doing what's not been asked, and how that can actually cause, well, miscommunication, struggles, things not being done. And if we fast forward and we go to the current young people, so Gen Z, and then also Generation Alpha, who's now at school, we actually see similar things happening. A lot of times it's like, okay, just check the internet. And not everyone is equipped to actually work just with the internet. We want to be able to ask questions to get assurance. Now, if we go to the system scan, it consists of 3 layers. And the first one is what we call the CPU, the processor, the core. And it's about what's not working. What is slowing down your business? What is causing that it cannot work on full capacity? Maybe you get stuck, you get frozen. To use a non-mainframe term, we all know the blue screen of death from Microsoft. But yes, getting stuck, being frozen, having a frozen screen. We all know that back in the days they said Ctrl-Alt-Delete, and I think for mainframes, I'm not sure, probably power down and power back up. Of course, that is going to give a huge problem if you do so. So that's the last thing that you actually want to do, because everything goes haywire the moment that you actually do so. So If you are stuck in your mindset, you have your own belief systems, and you're wondering why no one is working in a way, in a manner that you used to do, being efficient, knowing what to do. Because let's face it, when we talk about Generation X, and basically pre-internet, then there was nothing. We had to be inventive. I mean, if you wanted food and you came from school, you had to get food yourself. If you wanted dinner and they weren't home yet, you had to figure it out yourself. If you had homework, you would call your classmates. So that was a whole different ball game back then. And well, if you wanted money, you had to work. And what a lot of people are running into nowadays is that the way they used to think is not aligning with the way the younger generations are thinking. Now, I told you about IT, and apparently normally it's like 15 to 20% of people who are literally wired differently in their brains, so neurodivergent. But when it comes to IT, it's like up to 35%, as far as I can tell. Don't pin me on the data, please. But it's known that people who are in IT are actually perfectionists. That's why they often have a burnout. So it takes a specific type of person to actually work in a highly analytical environment like the IT. And a lot of people on the spectrum, they actually thrive really well when it comes to IT. Unless, of course, you run into reorganizations and having to do certain things a certain way, which actually doesn't make sense. If we would look at your business, is it running like it should? Or do you feel like, oh, actually, now you say so, Lexi, yes, things are slowing down. It's not running as smooth as I had expected, and I do not know why. Then one of the first things that you want to check is what's going on in your organization. So does it has to do with the devices you are using, the material you are using, the ideas you have? Or is there something going on internally, maybe with your teams? And when you do polls, that's a very sure way to get answers, especially if it can be done anonymously. So it depends on what's the penalty if you are honest and open about certain things. Well, if there are penalties, no one is going to speak up. But if there are not, and you actually invite people over to lunch or dinner to discuss certain things, then you might actually get real answers. And a lot of times, it's not so much about the people working there, it's about how they are supposed to function according to management. One of the examples I want to give, and that was a very drastic decision, and I still don't know why they made it the way they did, was like, let's cut out an entire layer of people, because that's what often happens when shareholders don't have enough profit. Hear me. I'm not talking about there is loss. I'm talking about not enough profit. Then the first thing they do is actually cut back on people. And what happens? The knowledge also disappears when you want to get rid of all those people who have the most knowledge and experience, and hence are the most expensive. Of course, at some point, you are running into the trap of not having the people anymore who guaranteed your service. So the question is this the smart thing to do? Or, Now, if you know what you're running into when it comes to your business, and you realize, like, okay, I thought I did good, I'm likely doing good, but actually there are some things that are not working out. So maybe I'm not doing it as good as I should be doing. Then you can actually look at yourself. You can look at the system. You can look at the core of everything. And then you can be like, okay, this is slowing down because I did or I didn't do. You fill out the dots. And when you are capable of doing so, then you are owning up. So it starts with voicing yourself, speaking up about what's not working, really taking a good look. And then it's about owning up and really looking at yourself like, okay, is there something I can change? Something that has to do with my expectations. And maybe my expectations are sort of valid, as in, if you know how to figure things out yourself and you know how to be inquisitive and how to solve things, of course, that works like a charm. But if you have not been taught how to, well, then maybe something else needs to happen as well. So then we go to the part where we go from owning it. So literally taking a look at yourself, and if your views are maybe outdated, to viewing and gaining perspective. So you're going to take a look at perspective from other people and how you can actually bridge those gaps. So we're talking about the gateway. So we went from the core, the CPU, as in, hey, things are slowing down. Capacity is not working anymore. We are literally frozen stuck. The processor is frozen stuck, to the legacy software, as in what you grew up with. What are your mindsets? What are your ideas? What did you learn? What didn't you learn? And then we got to the part where we were talking about gateways and how do we connect with one another. And often we talk a different language. I mean, just go across the border here in Holland. So when you enter Belgium, it always surprises me, but the first thing I hear is French. And when I ask them if they can speak English, the answer is no. If I ask them, can you speak Dutch? The answer is no. And then, well, then I need to speak French. So if I'm in luck, the younger generation often do speak English, but it's, well, you know, it's about knowing what to expect and to be prepared for it. And well, if you don't want to speak other people's languages because you're proud of your own country, well, that could cause some problems down the line or some challenges. But if you're like, I'm right and you're wrong, you have to learn my language. Well, and it happens. It happens. It even happens at airports abroad that people don't speak English and they're trying to scream at you in their own language. And then I'm like, well, you can ask me to throw things away, but I would like to speak to someone who actually speaks English, because you cannot expect my GP to write something in Spanish, for instance, when the international language is English. Well, that's just a sidestep, but it does say something about the attitude of people. Now, if we go back to the whole thing that happened this week in Holland, I'm not going to say that I have the answer. I'm very happy there's something like the lava storm, which is specifically tailor-made for the Netherlands. And I guess that when we are dealing with certain circumstances which are exceptional, that's when we actually have to have exceptional solutions. And the lava storm is actually quite a good example for how things should be. Now, like I said, the entire infrastructure, it sort of went down. Lots of people had to call for meals because they couldn't get to the grocery store anymore. It reminded me a little bit of the days when you would go into a department store and it was empty. That bit. Yes, you probably remember. But getting back to the whole system scan, when I was explaining it to people today, I said, well, at some point, I got in contact with people who were neurodivergent. I'm one too. My brother is one too. He talked about it. He's in IT. And that's what got me thinking. And then I realized, oh yeah, I've been helping my clients who are neurodivergent for years now. I didn't realize because I didn't know the term, but I did realize there was a misconception when it came to understanding one another. So I've been a connection catalyst for, I don't know, for decades probably now. And at first I was like, oh, that's a cool term. But unfortunately, it's a very necessary term too, because it's about being able to have two parties understand one another. And because everything has to go high speed, we don't have any patience anymore. I mean, let's face it, we swipe all day long, we make decisions like very quickly. And patience has run out of the window, and that's a shame. A lot is expected from us. So there's a lot of people who have to rush home or have to rush to work. And it's one of the reasons, like I said, I don't want to work for a bus anymore. And especially, I do not want to drive in morning rush hour. In the evening, it's different. People are more laid back. And it does take time, but people drive differently. The way they drive in the mornings, like literally going like this, I mean, I can do it if I need to, but it's not relaxing. So I'd rather not. But, you know, if it's the way it is, then it needs to be done, especially when it otherwise affects the safety of other cars. But I also know that when we do so, and something were to happen, then we're all in one big collision course. And that's what I don't want. So getting back to functioning as a bridge between people, that's why I like the word gateway so much. Because, well, it's about protocols and about talking the same language. And we all can say, well, it makes sense to have someone who's got a certain knowledge about a certain topic to become the manager, but all of us are changing. And the question, of course, is do we allow that person to be in that position? Now, depending on the kind of culture, so are you allowed to voice yourself, or are you not allowed? And, you know, it's like, if you do, there's the door, bye. You don't want that. I get that. But I do believe that when you do allow people to speak up, it leads to not just mutual respect, but it also leads to freedom on both ends. Why? Because if you understand your team better, then you can also probably instruct and guide them better. So yes, it does take some time, but compared to the loss you might have if you don't guide them, whoa, that might make a big difference. Because, like I said, people, we hardly look at one another nowadays. We communicate using ChatGPT. Well, I don't, but a lot of young people do. Especially due to COVID, a lot of societal norms have gone out the window because people just simply didn't interact. And those years are basically critical. So when I talked to one of the younger ones out there and I said, do you know the difference between you and you? Now, in Holland, just like in French and in some other languages, for instance, like Spanish, we make a difference. We make a distinction between talking to someone your age and someone who is older than you. And a way of showing respect is by changing the word for you. Now, like I said, in English, there is no distinction, but in Holland, there is. It's the difference between jij and u. So, jij, you, what you say to the young ones and those who are your age, and u is meant for the people who are older and have deserved our respect. So I asked one of the people, one of the young ones out there, I said, do you know the difference between one and the other? No. I said, okay. So when someone is older than you and you want to respect them, then you say u. And it was kind of funny because then she started addressing me with u. I said, well, you don't have to say u to me. You can say yeah. But yeah, it's something to think about. And where do they learn that? Is that from the parents? Is that at school? And what if you never learned how to behave in a way that was needed? You know, when we grew up, for some of us, we grew up with our parents still at home. So my mom would be at home with cookies and tea or orange juice, but she would raise us according to the way she had been raised. And my mom was from 1932. So pre-World War II. So the norms and the way that you talked to other people, well, you did it with respect. Maybe you didn't respect them at all, but you did respect the people enough to use it. That's the way it was taught. And when people no longer had any guidance because their parents were working, of course, who was supposed to teach them those norms and those ideas? And basically, that's what we're running into, because with every new generation, other things which once were the norm are no longer the norm. And they just don't know. I mean, when I started to work in the beginning, no computers. We had to do everything by hand. There was someone with a coffee cart at 11 and at 3. There was someone who would check my letters. Well, that's a whole different ballgame. And nowadays, of course, with the whole IT, we do things on our phones and we do things, on the computer or wherever. And, well, there's a spelling checker, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, it's the way it should be. And I can tell you, I've seen people, CEOs, who still can't spell. But regardless, and then we get back to how to interact with one another. And that applies to Gen X too. What if you are becoming like a senior because of your experience, and they promote you to be a team leader, but you don't know how to lead a team? And that's when we get back to that same question. What if you run a business? You started running a business on your own because you have these amazing ideas, and likely you are neurodivergent as well. And then what happens when you run into others? when you have a team and you are not equipped to lead a team. You are lead to run a business. You know how to look forward to the future and see what's happening and what to invest in and what not. But that other part, working with people, oh my God, that can be so hard to do. Now, let's face it, things won't go back to the way it was. We are doing more and more, learning things on our own more and more. We are becoming more and more individualistic. So, isn't it time for a change on our end and show to others how it can be done? So, if you're still watching this, then you probably can relate to things having changed and that it might not work the way it should be working. Now, I can understand that you might not know how to deal with certain things. And because of that same question, I came up with this idea, and it's called the Steam Power Collective. And before I get into the Steam Power Collective, I want to make a jump to something I would love to see happening in the future. And it's called the Park of Pride, Power, and Perspective. And basically, it's a place where the individuals who are on the spectrum or who are considered neurodivergent can thrive. So, whereas I'm on top of the younger ones to see that they actually learn to learn and they don't drown in a system that has to be generic. Like I said, I'm also guiding the millennials out there and Gen Z. And I've seen how they literally get stuck because they are not understood. And it would be so nice to actually give them the chance to actually be appreciated, be understood, instead of considered either like you have no brains or, well, I already explained it here, and then, you go somewhere else. Not having the time, but actually see the person and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to help you out. I'm going to guide you. Because when you invest time and a little bit of money in these people, and I mean the people who otherwise might not understand what they need to do exactly, and then they go do things their own way, which could be at the expense of customer service and excellence. Well, that can cost you a lot of more money in the long run. And that's not what we want. I mean, running a business might be difficult enough as it is, or maybe it's easy for you. I don't know. But let's not get to deal with not being understood as well. So hence the Park of Pride, Power, and Perspective. And there's something else that I want there too. So I want Gen X to be able to come over there. Of course, other people are welcome too. But it's about finding other people who are in the same situation as they are and who have to learn or come up with ideas how they can improve the communication within their company. And the question, of course, is how can that best be done? And then we have to look at mindsets. Do you remember what I said about being stuck and about the legacy mindsets? So if you have a certain way of thinking, which is based on how you grew up, on your experiences, on where you grew up, and you hold on to that, you might run the risk of not being able to recognize what's going on in your life and in your business, and you might alienate others from you. And that's, of course, something we don't want to happen. So by talking to others, you are in a sort of similar situation, and also really have the coaching conversations. You can, well, I can pretty quickly determine when someone is skipping something, because they're literally skipping something. It's the not saying things, the diverting. There are small signals which to me are very apparent, but for others are not that apparent if you're not used to it. By asking people what they don't want and you flip it, you actually can figure out what they do want. And so by talking to people and having them communicate with like-minded souls, you can actually get quite a bit of information. So I want people to have what they say be recorded. So the most specific expressions which are true to them are actually being captured. Do the same thing on video and then have it played for them. So they can see, hey, this is how we were, this is where we are now, and this is where we want to be, and how to move forward towards that. The step prior to this is actually taking people on a trip, whether it's in a city, Chicago, San Diego, or through multiple countries, like the European Christmas experience. It's about taking them to places where it's a combination of fun, but also, well, hard work, introspective. So it's about enjoying where you are because you're in a different environment. Also using the elements which are very specific for those environments, and then saying, okay, so let's talk. What's going on? And because we're talking about like-minded people, people are more eager to open up. They feel less vulnerable because they're not the only one in those situations. And if you combine everything that I've just talked to you about, then when we talk about the system scan, that's actually basically the entrance to the whole thing, because it starts with realizing something is not adding up in my business. Like I said, it's about getting stuck, less capacity. It takes forever to get something done. And you want to know, how can I improve things? But if you hold on to your own beliefs and you're not open to change, then the question is there anything possible when it comes to change? Or are you willing to look at things from a different perspective? And then you probably need someone like me or someone else who actually does the translation between people and what's going on, because that's quite often where things go haywire, when people don't understand one another the way they should. If you take that a step forward or further, then you understand that I want those like-minded people, the Steam Power Collective. I want to set up a founders team of the Steam Power Collective. So, in order to get steam engines, you need to get moving. And then once it's running, it's running. But in order to get it running, there needs to be a few things which really need to align with one another, and it does take time. But once it does, it's like a beast, like that lava storm. I would like those people to come together, and not just for a trip, but to work all year round with one another. Check in with one another through the week, 3 minutes each, 40 minutes max. So you know what to focus on when you are going through the day, with intention, with knowing what to focus on. but also get into more specific things related to the business. And when we talk about certain topics like clarity, confidence, change, productivity, we also get into what can be improved on, well, actually on multiple levels. Same like, are you running low on energy? Are there things that you can change? And say we take like influence, for instance. Well, if you don't know how to influence someone, say in a positive manner, then, well, it's costing you energy because you have to work much harder. So now that you know what I would like to achieve this year and the park, well, if I can achieve it in the upcoming years, that would be amazing, because it's not only for the neurodivergent community out there, but it's also for those who are in hospice. And then I'm talking about the young ones out there. So basically, those who are not understood by society, because it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. I want them to have a place and be understood, and especially for the young ones to leave their own legacy. So if you're ready to take a look at what's going on in your business, and you are aware that things might not run as smooth as they could, or they did once upon a time, then find me, because I am having a trial period for people, the founders for the Steam Power Collective, and I do a free system scan for you. So we talk about what's going on in your business and with the people in your team, and what's going the way it should and what's not going the way it should. And I'll come up with some suggestions. And if you're like, oh, finally someone who understands me, then, maybe it's time for you to join the Steam Power Collective. And, well, if you do have the possibility, how about some trips to actually meet up face to face with other people? I mean, it's one of the things that I love, actually seeing other people and brainstorming with them on the spot. Now, if you're open for this, watch the description later on. I'll show you where to go. But for now, if you are here and you're still watching, maybe you can leave a comment and tell us how you think about how things are going between the various generations. If you feel there's enough respect and open communications, freedom, and if so, or if you don't see it, if so, what would be your advice? And if you don't see it, what would you recommend to others so things can actually improve? If you know people who could use maybe such a system scan or would love to be in the Steam Power Collective, please refer them to me so we can start with a small group to change things. Because the more people who are aware of how to communicate and work with the differences between generations, the bigger the ripple effect. And then hopefully we will be kinder to one another and more patient. And, well, let's show each other some more respect. I'll see you next week. And don't forget, if you want to be part of the Steam Power Collective, then you know where to go. Check the description.